I started off at Central and then transferred to A&T. And again, it was just an extension of these black institutions shaping my life. My brother had also attended North Carolina A&T. And like I said, my father passed. Yeah. And it's something about being in a space and surrounded by professors who believe in you when you don't even believe in yourself.
I love that.
Right? Yeah. I mean, again, here I am, sort of a broken vessel, coming in, transferring in. My father's just passed. I could easily get down on myself, and at times I did. Sure. But it was my professors who would lift me up, who would call me at home, say, "Hey, you missed class. What's going on?" Yeah. Who would check in on me.
Yeah, man.
Because again, they saw me as an extension of themselves.
Yeah, yeah.
And you can't recreate and duplicate that at every institution. HBCUs have often sort of filled that gap and that hole for us, making sure that again we were invested in. They poured into us.
Sure. Yeah. Hello and welcome to the Ross Cloud Podcast. I'm your host, Chris Ross, and this platform was created to motivate and to inspire in hopes that you will become a better you as we navigate through the clouds of life, empowering one another. Listen, I have a very, very special guest with us. First of all, I got to read his credits because I'm telling you, this is one that is we've been waiting on for a while, and timing is everything. You know what I'm saying? So he is a passionate educator and award-winning author, the Henry E. Fry Distinguished Professor of History at North Carolina Agriculture and Technical State University, where he also serves as the inaugural director for the Center of Excellence for Social Justice. He has received a major fellowship in support of his research that includes an appointment as a Humanities Writ Large Fellow at Duke University in 2013. And he was an inaugural recipient of the Mellon HBCU Fellowship at the John Hope Franklin Humanities Institute at Duke in 2009. None other than the one and only Jelani M. Favors, PhD. What's happening, doctor?
What's good, brother? What's good?
Man, nothing much. I want to say to you again, brother, thank you. Thank you again.
It's an honor, man.
Yeah,
it's
thank
an honor
you
to be with you.
Yeah, absolutely, no man. Doubt. Yes, man. Thank you for gracing us with your presence. Jelani, this is, like I said in the beginning, this is an interview I've been wanting to do for a while, for some time now. But again, timing is everything.
Timing is everything.
And this was the perfect time. And brother, I was doing a little research on you and saw some of the amazing things that you were doing in our community. And I was able to learn something, too, that I didn't know. You know what I'm saying? So it was beautiful. And look, man, I had the wonderful pleasure of seeing you doing Homecoming, which was dope, as you was on your DJ
baby.
skills. Yes,
you know how we do.
Come on, And that was my first one, so trust me, I thoroughly enjoyed it,
Always
man.
welcome, brother.
Yeah,
Always welcome.
And looking forward to do it again, man. So listen, man, we're not going to hold the folks up any longer, man. We're going to go ahead and jump right into it. And I like to take the folks on a journey just a little bit. So I want to kind of talk about your love for history and where it began. So if we could start there, and then I'll break down and we'll get into the book and everything else. But let's take the folks on the journey, because the premise of this show is to help people become better as we navigate through the clouds of life, empowering one another. And this segment of this show would definitely empower those to understand the importance of education and how it can empower us. So let's begin there. Where did your love for history begin?
Man, that's a great question. People of our generation, we have been profoundly shaped by institutions, black institutions to be exact.
Yeah.
And so, my father was a history major at North Carolina A&T State University, which is where I also went to school and ultimately became a history major. My brother was a history major, but I am a product of two black parents who came of age during the Black Power era. And so my father ended up graduating from A&T with that degree in history. He went to law school at North Carolina Central University, became a labor lawyer. But from the very outset, he knew that he wanted to raise two sons underneath the umbrella of these profound black institutions. And when I say black institutions, I mean the black church. I mean black schools. Black organizations. These were things that I was always exposed to as a child. And one of the things that I know you and I both can probably relate to is the incredible race and the powerful race men and women,
yes,
right? When I say race men and race women, I mean people who were incredibly proud, not just of the race, but they understood there was a certain level of racial responsibility that they had, right? Is that we got to lift up black organizations. We have to lift up black businesses. We have to look into the eyes of young black kids and remind them about who they are. So from a very, very early age in these churches, right, I was, Black History Month. We were celebrated. They would give us James Baldwin speeches and Langston Hughes poems to read, Paul Laurence Dunbar poems to recite and to remember. So we were surrounded by Black history. And then I started off preschool at Winston-Salem State University. So as a scholar who has written on HBCUs, I often tell people that I was really sort of born into this HBCU lifestyle. So I was always surrounded by these powerful institutions that reaffirmed and reminded me about how important it is to be connected to a struggle, to be connected to a story. And so that's part of that trajectory that sort of put me on that path towards embracing and loving history. I had extremely race-conscious parents, and those race-conscious parents made sure that they surrounded me with institutions that reminded me of the importance of our story.
Yes, sir. Damn right. Power to the people.
Power to the people. Power to the people.
Sir. Yes, sir. Absolutely love it, man. That's amazing. And, as you was going on this journey, you ended up at North Carolina A&T, which I love the way you said you was born into it. So once you saw it, it was automatically, I'm going to be it.
Yeah, without question. Yeah. And actually, I started off at North Carolina Central University.
Oh, okay.
So my freshman year, I attended North Carolina Central University, and my father passed suddenly my freshman year, and I wanted to be a little closer towards home. So I left North Carolina Central, which I really loved. But when I got to A&T, I mean, I was there with your brother and the whole crew. People who I'd already known for years. Like I first met Al Shaw and Japheth when I was like in the seventh grade. I became incredibly great friends with these young men and young women who profoundly shaped my life.
Absolutely.
I started off at Central and then transferred to A&T. And again, it was just an extension of these Black institutions shaping my life. My brother had also attended North Carolina A&T. And like I said, my father passed. Yeah. And it's something about being in a space and surrounded by professors who believe in you when you don't even believe in yourself.
I love that.
Right? Yeah. I mean, again, here I am, sort of a broken vessel, coming in, transferring in. My father's just passed. I could easily get down on myself. And at times I did. Sure. But it was my professors who would lift me up, who would call me at home, say, hey, you missed class, what's going on? Yeah. Who would check in on me.
Yeah, man.
Because, again, they saw me as an extension of themselves.
Yeah.
And you can't recreate and duplicate that at every institution. HBCUs have often sort of filled that gap and that hole for us, making sure that again we were invested in. They poured into us.
Sure. Yep. Sure. I love what you said a few minutes ago. I want to go back just a little bit, and I know we have to watch time a little bit, but I want to go back a little bit because I heard you hint a little bit about a tumultuous journey in there to get to PhD.
Yeah.
That journey, if you would, can you kind of speak to that, what that was like, and how you found the strength, Doc, to be able to finish the task at hand? If you would.
Yeah. I often tell my academic journey to my students because I want them to be inspired by what can be. And part of that narrative is acknowledging the fact that I wasn't the best high school student.
No doubt.
Right? In fact, if I had my grades then trying to get into North Carolina Central or North Carolina A&T now, I would have not been able to be admitted. So I wasn't the best student, and it wasn't because I wasn't smart. It's just that I was in a scenario where I wasn't being challenged in the ways in which I should have been challenged.
Sure.
And it took getting to North Carolina Central, and then North Carolina A&T, for me to finally get professors who said, hey, I see something in this young man that has potential, that is a lump of coal waiting to be transformed into a diamond. So it wasn't really until I got to college that my academic skills began to flourish. And I began to take my academic responsibilities much, much more seriously. And so it wasn't until probably my junior year in North Carolina A&T that I had one of my professors and mentors, Dr. Claude Barnes, said, hey, you really need to start thinking about grad school and earn this PhD. Like, I think you got the talent to be a professional scholar. Yeah. And so he put me in contact with Dr. Nick Nelson Jr., Dr. William Nelson Jr. Everybody called him Nick. He's a professor of political science at The Ohio State University.
Come on.
They make us call the.
That's right.
But we're under contractual obligations to call it The Ohio State University.
Indeed.
I enrolled at Ohio State in 1997. So I finished my bachelor's in 1997. And went directly into grad school. Some people take a gap year and sort of stop. But my professor said, hey, keep that energy going and keep, motivating yourself. And I did. And it was really one of the best decisions that I ever made. I got my master's in African American Studies. I took a year off after that and worked for the Columbus Urban League because I wanted to do some work connecting in our community. And then I decided to re-enroll to the PhD program at Ohio State, where I finished with my PhD in 2006 in history.
Come on, brother. I love it. I absolutely love it, man.
It's a journey, man.
Yeah,
it's
absolutely, man. How did you bring about a balance in that between enjoying your youth and still staying on the trajectory of this goal you had in mind to finish your PhD and all that? How did you bring about a balance in your life with that?
Well, one, I went to HBCU. So, again, you're a student at HBCUs, you're going to be surrounded clearly by incredibly intelligent people. Yeah. But you're also going to be rooted and grounded in folks who know how to unplug, who know how to unwind, who know how to have a great time. And I was really blessed and fortunate that when I got to Ohio State, I had a lot of questions about going to grad school. I was wondering, like, hey, am I going to be surrounded by a bunch of old folks who got kids, who are married, and got all these other responsibilities? Yeah, man. But I got to Ohio State, and this was the case with a lot of Midwest research-oriented institutions. When they look for the best and brightest amongst black students, they recruit at HBCUs.
Sure, man.
And so I left A&T, went to Columbus, Ohio, thinking that I'm going to be surrounded by folks that I wasn't really familiar with. And who do I find? All of these kids who had gone to HBCUs just like me. Yeah. So Hampton and Florida A&M and Morehouse and Spelman, and we all connected, and we all reminded ourselves that in spite of the grind of our academic programs,
yes, sir,
it's okay for us to unplug and unwind. And so the whole cookout and the barbecue and the house parties, all that continued even into grad school. Man, I had an incredible community of support at A&T and when I was in school in North Carolina Central. And I had an even more important community at Ohio State because, again, I'm in the Midwest. It's not as many of us.
No, it's not.
In some of these spaces, particularly at a large research-oriented institution like Ohio State, you can get lost in that.
Absolutely.
So to be able to find people that you can connect to, who help you through that whole process, that arduous process of finishing grad school, that was critically important. I was just really blessed and fortunate to have good friends from all walks of life who we all finished with our degrees, but we also created this beautiful community of support.
Man, I love it, man. And Columbus, Ohio is a great town.
Yeah, it is.
Great town. I went there in my youth, man. I absolutely enjoyed that town. Yeah. Man. Great town.
Right on the river.
Yes, sir. Right on the river. Great town, man. So listen, man, this is a great segue to go right into who you are and what you're about. Mm-hmm. So the first question I have for you is, what role did HBCUs play in providing education for African Americans during segregation and the civil rights era? And I know that's who you are. So, so that first question I have for you.
So I took a class called The History of Black Education when I was at school at Ohio State. Yeah. And in fact, when I arrived at Ohio State, because part of one of the things that you're expected to do as a grad student is to develop a research plan, right? Like, what do you want to research? Yeah. You're working on a thesis and eventually working on a dissertation. And one of my professors encouraged me to re-examine the legacy of student activism at HBCUs. And of course, when you're a student at A&T, we talk about sit-ins all the time because, of course, February 1st, 1960, these 4 freshman students launched this sit-in. So I got to Ohio State really kind of naive, right, thinking that everything that needed to be said about black student activism had already been said. And it was my professors there who, again, encouraged me to say, no, I think there's a whole lot more meat on that bone, and we need to pull back that curtain and really get a better understanding of the legacy of black colleges. And so I took this class, History of Black Education, and I began to read all these different texts. And it's there that, yes, you're introduced to this history and this legacy of why HBCUs matter, about why black education has mattered. But I also began to see that there was so much more to be said about why HBCUs have been relevant, not just to the academic dreams of black people, but to the freedom dreams of black people. We don't have the sit-ins. We don't have the civil rights movement. We don't have the black power movement if we don't have HBCUs. Right? So HBCUs provided a critically important space where, again, black youth could connect to the critical concerns of the black masses, where there all these leaders. I mean, it's a virtual who's who of black leadership in the 19th and 20th century that comes out of black colleges. And so you talk about this era of segregation and Jim Crow, but it's also about understanding these freedom fighters, right, and how they fought, and more importantly, how they had been trained to fight, equipped with the intellectual tools to deconstruct white supremacy. They learned that at HBCUs, at black colleges. And so I began to examine that, and that put me on the path towards writing this book, Shelter in a Time of Storm, how black colleges have fostered generations of leadership and activism. So it's, again, to me, the two most important pillars of the black community and the black freedom movement in this country have been the black church and black colleges. And there's been so much that has been taught and written about black churches. I felt as though there was still a lot of space for us to understand the legacy of HBCUs. And there's still so much. Again, I mean, my book only scratches the surface. There's all these incredible stories that need to be told about why these spaces have been so vitally important.
Which the choices of the schools that you chose were amazing, too. When I looked at my research on it, I was like, okay, my brother went in on that.
Well, what's crazy,
dope, and I'm sure you're probably going to do more.
I mean, what's crazy is, again, I talk about 7 schools in the book. And I've been blessed and fortunate to have the opportunity to go to different HBCUs across the country talking about it. And inevitably the question is, oh, that's great, but why didn't you talk about Florida A&M? Right? Why didn't you talk about South Carolina State? So people often ask me, like, how did you choose all of these schools, and why didn't you choose mine? And it's part of the friendly banter and competition that we often have. I grew up in Winston-Salem, so Winston-Salem State.
Yes, sir.
And you got A&T and North Carolina Central and John C. Smith. We've always had these sort of friendly competitions, but at the end of the day, it's all family and it's all love. And you're right. There's like I said, we've just scratched the surface. There need to be greater studies on the legacy of Johnson C. Smith and Livingstone and Fayetteville State and Elizabeth City State. I mean, all these schools have incredibly rich histories, and they're very similar in nature. So, no, I think these are stories that need to be told, and hopefully they will be.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I think you're the man to get it done too.
Well, I mean, that's
the
thing about it is that when you are a scholar and you're trying to write, one of the things that you want to do is that you want to inspire the new wave. I mean, there are over 100 HBCUs. I can't tell the story about all of them, but young scholars coming up can take that mantle and say, hey, I read Dr. Favor's book, but, he talked about this, but this still needs to be talked about, right? Or no one's really talked about this person or that person or this institution. So you're not really looking to write the end of the story, because the story never really ends. Right. You're just looking to elevate the story and take it to a higher height.
I love that. that. Just passing the torch right along.
Passing the torch.
Keep it going. That way that legacy continues. It never stops. I got you. Okay, so if we could, can we speak to a few of the contributions HBCUs have shaping and landscaping of higher education in the United States? I think you touched on it a little bit. Maybe you did. But if you could you touch on some of those contributions a little bit? Well,
one of the things that I've had the opportunity to bring to the attention of folks, when I've talked about this, is that you look at HBCUs, you look at PWIs, which again stands for predominantly white institutions.
That's right.
When you look at the histories and legacies, they are indeed radically different, right? Radically different in terms of the tone, the tenor of what conversations are going on within these spaces. The first HBCU was founded in 1837. 1837. I mean, slavery hasn't even ended.
No, sir.
But in Philadelphia, the Institute for Colored Youth, which later will go on to be renamed Cheney State University, is founded. And you look at what's going on in 1837 for black folks, white supremacy is becoming increasingly crystallized into the political life of our nation.
Yeah.
And so these are extremely difficult times. Black folks are trying to escape slavery in the South and head to the North to places like Philadelphia and New York and Boston. They're trying, and Ohio. They're trying to escape the hellhounds that are on their trail. And so HBCUs become a very important space where many of these youth who have academic talent can ultimately enroll in these institutions and then make a difference in the life of these institutions. And so when you ask me the impact that they've made, one of the things that I think is critically important to understand is that, yes, HBCUs have produced lawyers and doctors and engineers and teachers and every walk of life you can imagine in terms of professional industries. But the most important contribution that HBCUs have made, which make them radically distinct from their PWI counterparts, is that HBCUs have produced social movements to transform our world, to transform our country, right? You didn't see movements from students at Harvard and Yale and UNC Chapel Hill and NC State saying, hey, we got to do something about this white supremacy and Jim Crow, right? You saw people saying, hey, these things work to my advantage. And, there were people who never called them out. But at HBCUs, it provided a space to embolden and empower young black people. And again, this is very deliberate now. This is not by happenstance, right? This, in my book, I refer to this as sort of a second curriculum, right? Is that, yes, you got this first, they're teaching history and Latin and Greek and math and all the regular courses they were teaching at Harvard and Yale. This is a great quote from James Weldon Johnson, who was one of the founders of the NAACP, who enrolled at Atlanta University, which is now Clark Atlanta University, as a young man. And he said the academic curriculum that we were studying was practically the same thing they were studying at Yale. But the difference was we talked about race, right? We talked about race within these spaces. And didn't just talk about it. We were empowered by the contradictions that were enshrined in American life. And when I say empowered, they were inspired to call out these contradictions. To say, you can't say that we hold these truths to be self-evident, all men are created equal, yet we don't practice that on a daily basis. In fact, we create systems to rob people of that. And so that's what sets HBCUs apart, is that the discourse, the conversations that were going on within these spaces, it didn't just encourage black students to use their intellectual talents. It propelled them, right? It pushed them, right, to ultimately call out these contradictions and to push America forward. And so again, we continue to produce all these incredible folks, from all walks of life, who, all the celebrities. Again, I mean, you don't want to have to go start the alumni roll call at HBCU. You'd be here all day.
Yeah, you would.
Right. But what is important to really understand is that without HBCUs, we wouldn't have the type of social movements that have emerged in this country that have really pushed this nation forward.
I love it, man. Great answer, man. Great answer. What challenges have HBCUs faced throughout history, and how have they overcome them? And do you think there's more work that needs to be done? I
was going to say, you say throughout history. I said, bro, these challenges are ongoing.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Let's be honest. The clear, the most clear barrier and impediment that has faced HBCUs has been this massive discrepancy in terms of funding, right? In terms of financial support. And that's just the legacy of segregation.
You're right.
I mean, I tell people all the time, you walk on these college campuses And it's almost like walking sometimes through a segregation museum. And I don't say that to disparage HBCUs, but clearly the infrastructure, right, the buildings or lack thereof, clearly illustrates that there has been this massive gap, right? So there's a study that came out 2 or 3 years ago, which pointed out that just since the 1980s, let me say that again for your listeners. Just since the 1980s, North Carolina A&T has been shorted by almost $3 billion.
Wow.
From the state legislature. $3 billion. Now, can you imagine what North Carolina A&T or any HBCU can do, not with millions of dollars, but billions of dollars in terms of infrastructure, in terms of hiring new faculty, creating new programs, all the accoutrements that we often see associated with PWI life, right? You know, these institutions are flush with resources and scholarships and all these things. And so HBCUs have really sort of been behind the 8 ball in that regard, and always having to play the catch-up game. Now, again, let me also clearly state that, and this is the story of black folks, we've always done more with what? With less, right?
Less,
and so that's really sort of part of the narrative, is that HBCUs, in spite of steal, right? You know, in spite of these disadvantages, they've continued to make progress. And I often tell people, and I actually write about this in the conclusion of my book, is that, you know, I don't want to create the sort of rose-colored image of HBCUs. I mean, clearly there are tons of also internal problems that these institutions face, and not just internal problems, but it's often a broader portrait of the struggles that black folks have had in general. Yes, there has been colorism. Yes, there has been classism. Yes, there has been paternalism. There are all these isms that exist, which have often created, in some cases, toxic workspaces and toxic learning spaces for students and for faculty and administrators within these spaces. And that's important to acknowledge that. And sometimes I think, sadly, we stick our head in the sand and we don't acknowledge that. So it's important to tell that side of the story too.
Sure.
But, you know, it's also important to not just acknowledge the fact that HBCUs have been criminally underfunded, but that they're still being criminally underfunded. And that's something that we need to try to encourage our students, encourage our alumni to, one, be aware of, and to seek to try to eradicate that, right? To bring A&T and all HBCUs into the present by continuing to fight for what is our share.
That's right. So let me get this right then. Doc, you're saying that $1 million just scratches the surface.
Oh, yeah.
So that means those donations that come through from wealthy individuals, this just barely just enough.
Look, you could take all of the HBCUs, like I said, there are over, I think it's 101 or 109 HBCUs. You can combine all HBCUs and all of their endowments. And I think I read somewhere that it won't even approach 10% of Harvard's endowment.
Come on, man.
So 10%. All right. So, I mean, we're talking about this massive gap that people don't really understand. And this is one of the reasons why the catch-up game has been so long. I mean, these are institutions which, again, let's be very clear.
Sure.
Were founded off of slavery, right? And many of them were funded through slavery. Definitely in the North, right? Because again, many of the founders of these, Harvard was founded in the 1600s.
Yes, sir.
Right? And slavery was becoming more deeply entrenched in American life. All these Ivies, many of them were founded by slave owners. If they weren't slave owners, they were profiteers of slavery. They owned textile mills, which received Southern cotton. The Brown brothers, who founded Brown University, right?
Yes, sir.
They created slave ships.
Yes,
that was their business. That
was their thing.
Right? That was their trade. And so these are institutions who are deeply staunch, deeply connected into the oppression of black folks and profiteered off of white supremacy. That's just truth.
Yeah, that's just
That's
truth.
not controversy.
No,
that's
not
not some sort of incendiary statement. That's the truth. And not only that, but that's the truth that many of those institutions are now beginning to recognize.
Absolutely.
Right? Harvard, even UNC, they're like, hey, we should study this. We should talk about this.
Been there.
But beyond studying it, what are you going to do about it? And I think that's the danger, is that right now in this current political climate, some of these same institutions are cutting DEI programs, right? Diversity, equity, inclusion programs. They're cutting back on funding humanity programs that could help us have these conversations.
That's
history
right.
and African American studies and sociology. Many of these programs are being cut back, and so you can't give this type of inequity lip service. Right? You have to be dedicated to creating programs, investing in programs, and investing in HBCUs, right, to try to bridge that gap. Harvard University just created a new partnership with HBCUs. Yale just also created a new partnership with HBCUs. In fact, A&T is one of the partner schools now with Yale. Awesome. And it is awesome. But again, as you said, we're just scratching the surface.
I got you. Yeah.
These millions of dollars, while they're beneficial, will never help us close the billion-dollar gaps that exist in higher education and that afflict the legacy and continued longevity of HBCUs.
Okay, this is my last question. Then we're going to talk a little bit about your book, and then we'll close it out.
Okay.
So this last question right here is, looking ahead, Doc, what do you see as the future role and significance of HBCUs in the broader context of American higher education?
I'll say this. We need them now more than ever.
Yeah.
As I just mentioned, DEI programs across the country are being cut. They're under attack. And actually, there are a few people who asked me about this, particularly in the last 2 years, about, this attack on affirmative action. And, hey, what is this going to mean for HBCUs? What is this going to mean for HBCUs? And, one of the things that I've told people over and over again is that when those attacks happen, I wasn't necessarily concerned about HBCUs.
Right.
I was concerned about PWIs. Right? Because, again, as I said before, let's be very clear, PWIs have been the center of production for white supremacist policies in America for years.
Yes, sir.
They've turned out students who crafted the language around Jim Crow, who bolstered and uplifted these policies that create these massive gaps in terms of wealth and opportunity for black folks as opposed to white people. So so we see some regression in that regards, and those spaces can continue to become highly toxic as they move forward. So I think HBCUs are going to continue to do what we've always done. And people are saying that, hey, you see an enrollment uptick.
Yes, sir.
At black colleges, and that's great. A&T, it's the largest HBCU in the nation. We're knocking on the door of 14,000 students. Not only are we knocking on the door of 14,000 students, but we're also knocking on the door of becoming a R1 institution, Research 1 institution, which means greater research dollars pouring into the institution, and that's great. But again, I'll just reaffirm by saying that we need black colleges now more than ever, not just to, again, turn out all these industry leaders, but to also remind America of its sins and of its shortcomings, because that's what HBCUs have done best. And now in this current climate, people want to forget that. And that's the reason why you cut history programs, because you don't want to be reminded about the past.
That's right.
And so I'm hopeful that as a history professor at an HBCU, that we can still have these important conversations and these challenging conversations. My mentor at Ohio State University, Dr. Hassan Jeffries, has an incredible podcast called Teaching Hard History.
I'm going to check it out.
Y'all, it's incredible. Award-winning. Teaching Hard History. And I think that's one of the things that we don't like in America. We don't like to challenge ourselves by learning the hard history of who we are, right? We want, as one of my other professors at Ohio State used to always say, we want the Disneyfication of American life. We want to be reminded of the myths, right? Things that make us feel comfortable. But we have to pull back that curtain and see who we are. And again, HBCUs have often been at the forefront of that. And I think now more than ever, we need black colleges to remember that and to rekindle that and to reignite that for the next generation.
I love it, man. Thank you for answering those questions. You did an amazing job on that. So now we're going to get into your book, A Shelter in the Time of Storm: How Black Colleges Foster Generations of Leadership and Activism. And you kind of touched on pretty much a lot of that too, though, Doc. But there was one thing that stood out to me as me doing my research on you and just looking at some of the things that you've done. there was one thing that you did, and it was very interesting, and I felt awful that I didn't know anything about Margaret Walker, who Nikki Giovanni, who I'm very familiar with, called her a national treasure.
Without question.
So I'm saying to myself, like, where in the hell was I at? Where did I miss that, knowing who my mom is? I'm like, who kept us, in tune with poetry and, everything with Black literature and authors and writers. And so I was sitting here like, where was I at?
Yeah.
So I'm going to read a little excerpt of it, but it's like the second part of it.
Sure.
And it's for my people.
Yeah, oh man, there you go.
So I'm going to read a little bit of this for those who haven't read it. You get a chance, go check it out and read it. It's going to blow your mind. It actually almost brought tears to my eyes as I was reading through it because it was so deep. So I'm going to read probably the second portion of it. For my people lending their strength to the years, to the gone years, and now years, and the maybe years. Washing, ironing, cooking, scrubbing, sewing, mending, hoeing, plowing, digging, planting, pruning, patching, dragging along, never gaining, never reaping, never knowing, and never understanding. Dude, we're still in that today.
Yeah, I was just going to say, we're in the maybe years right now.
We're still in that now.
Yeah.
So the impact of this poem, and when she wrote it, she was a prophet.
Yeah.
So if you would, can you kind of speak to that a little bit without divulging of too much, because y'all need to go get the book. Go get that book.
So, I mean, it's crazy how God works, man. You just mentioned a prophet.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
Knowing what I know about Margaret Walker, that's a really, really apt description of who she really was. And let me be more detailed in that. So one of the things that I really enjoyed about writing Shelter in a Time of Storm is that you come across all of these people, names that you are not familiar with. Or in my case, I was familiar with Margaret Walker, but I got to know her more intimately through writing this book and studying her. And one of the ways in which I studied her was looking at her diaries. Right, her diaries are on file at Jackson State University, where she taught for several years. And it's crazy because you think about research and how research is done. I kind of tell my students about this, and they kind of get freaked out. Is that people back in the day, they would keep diaries. They would keep memoirs. They would keep notes about their feelings. Now we call that Twitter. Right. Now we call that Snapchat or Instagram. These are going to be our diaries 40, 50, 60, 70 years from now.
That's right, man.
People, when they are looking back to study this generation and what's going on, they're going to be looking at your social media and hey, what was Chris Ross thinking and how was he carrying himself? And so they'll look back at and so I was able to open up these diaries of Margaret Walker, who taught at Jackson State from the 1940s to the Black Power era, early 1970s. For over 30 plus years, she taught at Jackson State University. And they were some of the most powerful primary sources that I had ever come across. I refer to her as a Black mystic. This is a woman who, and I'm being 100% honest about this. She accurately predicted in her diaries the federal government invading Little Rock, Arkansas, in 1957, which they did with the Little Rock Nine. She accurately predicted the assassination of John F. Kennedy. She accurately predicted the rise of the Civil Rights Movement prophetically. I ain't saying just like, I think next week but she would, like 5 years out, she would say in 1960. So again, when I say she's a Black mystic, she believed in astrology, right? And so she would often, write out in her diaries, her hey, Uranus is in this area, or we're in retrograde. I mean, so she was really a Black mystic, and she nailed some of these predictions. But beyond the predictions, she also unveiled her ongoing frustrations with white supremacy and Jim Crow in the belly of the beast. Right. This is a Black woman who was teaching in Mississippi in the 1940s and 1950s. And as this movement is exploding all around her, a movement that she had played a critical role in helping to bring about through her teaching at Jackson State University. She was inspiring young people right, to use their voices, to use their intellectual talents, to question and to examine white supremacy and Jim Crow. But here's a woman who also felt sidelined, right? Because Jackson State was a state-controlled institution by the racist Mississippi State Legislature. And the president at the time, Jacob Reddix, was kind of a hard line saying, hey, don't y'all be out here talking bad about the government. Y'all going to cost us our jobs. They're going to come in here and close down Jackson State. So he was a bit of a hard line administrator in that regards. But yet still, she was such a powerful woman. One of the quotes from her diaries that will forever stick with me, and there's several. But she wrote in her diary, she said, when will I cease to live and begin to be? Think about that. When I want to cease living and I want to become, right? I want to step into what I've really been called to do. That's we're going to go to church and say, that's a prophetic word for somebody right now. Right? When will you cease to simply live and begin to be? But she's saying that to provide context to this growing movement that's exploding all around her, a movement that she wants to get more involved in, but she's fearful about her life. Her friend Medgar Evers had been assassinated in 1963.
Yes, sir.
This was her friend and her neighbor. And so she's like, I'm tired of simply living. I want to become who and she's inspired by her students who now, by 1963, are deeply involved in the civil rights movement, which is now exploded onto the scene with the sit-ins in 1960. And so she's just a really great character, and I would call her a friend. I've never met her, but just going through her diaries, learning more about her, and the same thing with Joanne Robinson and Octavius Cato, and I mean, they're just all these professors and administrators and students who I learned about in writing this book, which showed me how critically important Black colleges were in serving as a shelter in a time of storm, right? Because nowhere else other than Alabama State, other than Jackson State, could our students feel the safety and protection to work out their angst, to work out their frustrations, to work out their anger with the white supremacist society.
That's something, Jelani. When we're talking about this, you're right. It's like we're still living in it. When
These
you look at police brutality. You look at the gentleman that died in the streets in Philadelphia, was murdered in the streets in Philadelphia. Like, this stuff is still going on, and that was 1800s. So, I mean, here we are now. It's 2024. We're still seeing it happening today.
Absolutely.
So that's this is a very, very powerful book that you have put together. I'm going to get my copy. I have not got my copy yet.
I got
but
you.
I'm going to purchase. Right on.
I got you.
Right on.
No need. I got you. I'm hand deliver it to you. I got you.
Right on, brother.
No doubt.
But it really was, as I was doing my research, as you get a chance to read the preface of the book a little bit and kind of scan, kind of give you a little introduction to the book. It was so very interesting. And I was like, wow, like this is amazing that these diaries and these writings are still at these HBCUs, and the stuff we need, it's a treasure. It really is a treasure.
And like I said before, we're just scratching the surface, man. Just scratching the surface.
So this is beautiful, and you're absolutely right. It will spark the next generation, even some of us that are older. It sparked something in me that said, hey, whoa, let me go look at this. Because automatically I started looking up Margaret Walker. I started looking up her writing and everything that she has done. So you're right. It continues to keep going and going and going.
Well, I think it also illustrates, again, as we started off in this conversation, the power of Black institutions. And again, not just Black HBCUs, but Black churches. I mean, there are so many people, not just from our generation and the previous generation, who first heard about Margaret Walker in church. Right? People would recite her poem for my people in church, particularly during Black History Month. Right? And so again, Easter, you had your little Easter speech, right? Sunday school, you'd have to learn scriptures. But many of these institutions also made sure that you learn Black history. I remember as a kid, I grew up in the AME Zion Church. I remember as a kid going into our Sunday school room and being surrounded by posters of Black people.
Man.
Black people. So again, I mean, and not just Black people, but again, powerful black leaders.
Absolutely. Yes,
right?
sir.
As I said before, we read James Baldwin, we read Langston Hughes, we read Margaret Walker in church.
Wow.
And so part of my concern is that, and again, this is something I write about in the conclusion of my book, is how do we recapture and rebuild and reinvest into black spaces and black institutions? Because in some ways, and I'm not alone in this, there are a number of people who believe that these spaces have become corrupted.
Wow.
Right? Not just HBCUs, but black churches as well, is that we're not passing along these messages. And again, this is a phrase I used in my book, which is a popular phrase now, but we're losing recipes, right? Because we're not remembering our chefs and our cooks.
Love it.
And those who passed on these traditions to us in the same way in which we once did. I mean, many of these churches now, aren't doing anything during Black History Month.
Absolutely.
Which is vitally important as we see DEI being cut all across the country and many of these schools banning books, and we don't want you having. So it's important that the spaces that we do control, the church, right? My classroom, right? Like when I close the door to my classroom, it becomes my space.
That's right.
And me and my students, we can relate to one another. We can empower one another. I can, again, hear their concerns and their freedom dreams for the future. And I could try to carry on that same tradition, much like Margaret Walker did. So, no, I mean, that's part of what I really enjoyed the most about writing that book, is coming across these names, these stories, these powerful, powerful stories of how, to bring it back to, and I'm a preacher's kid, so.
Oh, no, I get it.
so I'm going to bring it back.
I understand.
So there's a phrase which we often would say in the black community, how I got over, right? How you get over, Chris? You actually started off the interview like, tell me your get over story.
Yes, sir. How'd you get over?
How do you get over?
Yes, sir. Yes,
right?
sir.
And I think that's a question that still resonates within the black communities, that we still, and when people will ask you that, it wasn't simply for you to tell your story, right? But to also chart a path for other people who need to get over, who need to get through.
That's right.
Right?
Man.
For my people.
For my people.
And so black institutions have always been vital in that. Yeah. And I think it's important that we continue to rebuild and reinvest so we can share these freedom dreams with the next generation. Yeah. Because the fight is ongoing, brother.
Yes, sir.
And we still need shelters in a time of storm.
Yes, sir. And I appreciate this. This has been absolutely amazing. If you would, in closing, I usually have my guests say something positive to someone to help them become better and move on to that next big thing, whatever it is that God has for them. If they would move on and become great in whatever it is that they want to do. If you could speak to that and then tell the folks how they can follow you and how they can purchase your book.
Well, I'm on Instagram. I'm not on Twitter. I'm not on Facebook. Those places are a little bit too toxic for me. So I go on Instagram just so I can post my little pictures
and get out
and keep moving.
No doubt.
But you can follow me at Dr. Jelani Favors on Instagram. And of course, check my website out. It's drjelanifavors.com. Excuse me. And we just launched this center, right? The Center of Excellence for Social Justice, which I am so incredibly honored to have the opportunity to lead this center at my alma mater, to train a new generation of young students to find their voices in the most important way, to use their voices, rather, in the most important way.
That's
to
right.
find them and then to use them. So
That's right.
There's a great, and I'll close out with this, and I've told her story several times, but there's a woman by the name of Hattie Bailey, who I actually opened up my chapter. I wrote a chapter on Bennett College. Bennett College during the 1920s, 1930s, and 1940s. And when I was a not grad student, but on fellowship at Duke University in 2013, I was pulling together the last remnants of the book, trying to get it ready for publication. And the Bennett chapter was the last chapter that I had yet to really work on. Right. And so I'm doing research, going through these student newspapers, and I come across the story of Hattie Bailey, and which she was the SGA president at Bennett in 1936 or 1937.
I love it.
And I said, you know what? I wonder if Hattie Bailey is still alive. I mean, because she finished in 1930s, 1940. This is 2013. So I said, I'm going to take a shot in the dark, see if I can find her. And lo and behold, she was still living.
Wow.
She was in Philadelphia. She was in her 90s. But I called her on the phone. I was at Duke University. I called her on the phone, and I said, Miss Bailey, my name is Jelani Favors. I'm working at Duke University, trying to pull together a book on HBCUs and the legacy of Bennett College. Wow. And she stopped me like in mid-sentence after I said Bennett College. And she told me, she said, I learned how to speak at Bennett College.
Wow.
Right? Now think about what she's saying. Right?
Wow.
She's not saying she came to Bennett and she didn't know how to talk.
Nah.
Right? What she was saying was, I found my voice on the most important issues of the day affecting my people, and I was empowered to use that voice to speak for change.
Wow.
And I think that's what we have to remember.
That's right.
Is to learn how to find your voice.
That's right, man.
No matter what walk of life you're in. Not just to find your voice, but to use your voice to make us a better country, to make us a better people, to bring us together. And again, that's why I'm so thankful for you, my good brother, for this space that you're occupying.
Right on.
Because you're bringing together and helping people find their voice.
Yes.
Hopefully these podcasts that you are launching into the universe, that some in some way inspire people.
Yes.
Right? Embolden people, empower people to find their voices, to lean into their God-given talents.
Yes, sir.
And that's the word that I believe we with is much like Hattie Bailey. Learn how to find your voice and then make it relevant to other people. Again, not just yourself.
That's right.
Right. We live in a space and an age where everybody's concerned about their brand and how many followers they got and, who's liking me. I mean, it's a very selfish age that we've entered into.
Yes.
But when you can use your voice, use your platform, use your space to empower other people.
That's right.
To me, that's when you're truly doing God's work, man.
Yes,
so thank you for doing God's work, Chris.
Right on,
thank
brother.
you for having me here. And
right on.
I'm deeply appreciative, brother.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Dr. Favors, man. Again, man, we really do appreciate you coming in and gracing us with your presence. Man, when I was doing my research, and then I'm going to close out, I was like, writ large fellow. I had no clue what that was. I'm being serious, And so as I learned, I'm like, this is such a prestigious thing. And that's why it's so important that we go back to college. That's why it's so important that we do read, that we do research, so that we can empower ourselves.
Yeah.
It's a whole world out there in education that we need to tap into.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, no doubt.
But once we do it, it's like, oh, that's what that means.
Yeah.
So, man, this has been great. This has been an awesome journey, and I really do appreciate you again for coming in and gracing us with your presence. Listen, I hope that something was said today that can help you become a better you. Listen, I'm Chris Ross, and this is the Ross Cloud Podcast. Make it a great day and keep being great. Peace.
Today's episode of the Ross Cloud Podcast is sponsored in part by GospelStationCharts.com, where you can view gospel radio station song charts and track the promotion of your song, such as view how many stations are playing your song and how often, including what day and time your song played. Check it out now. Visit GospelStationCharts.com.